Okay. Today we're going to conclude our conversation on the age of martyrdom, because we move into the age of imperialism, or the imperial age of the church, next week. Today we're going to discuss two specific accounts, readings that you were assigned that I asked you to bring with you today so that you can take notes on them. Two accounts of martyrdom that are, now these are not obviously the only two accounts of martyrdom, but these are two of the earliest accounts outside of the account of martyrdom in the New Testament that, I guess you would say, suggest that these individuals were incredibly important to the early Christian church as examples of how to be good martyrs. All right. This is particularly the case, and I'll get into it, of Perpetua and Felicity, because it is quite unusual in that period of time to have stories that revolve around women that were significant. So I'm going to point out some of the things that the editor brings out of the reading, as well as what they express themselves and how it, because remember, these are no different than, when I say no different than the gospel accounts, they began as oral accounts, okay? Which means people were telling the stories of these individuals, and they became so significant that when they began to write down their history, these individuals were important enough to write down, to ensure that their stories remain. Before we get going, let's first review. Last lecture, I talked about three essential conditions, classically defined as who a martyr is. So let's review those. And then certain characteristics that Origen helped point out that you would find in the good martyr, okay? The holy martyr. I want to apologize. I'll promise to get better markers for next week. I didn't realize they were all going to run out of ink at the same time, right? So I know it's going to be tough to see what's up here, so I'm going to repeat what's up here. So first, when we talk about classically defined, what is a martyr, classically defined? First of all, in order to be a martyr, a death has to occur. You have to die. Not just suffer, not just be tortured, you have to die, right? The term for one in, I guess, Christianity and antiquity, if you were tortured because of your faith and you remained faithful, the title was you're a confessor, right? You're a confessor of the faith. You didn't die, but you were tortured. A martyr, a real death has to occur. Second condition, classically defined in martyrdom, you have to have died explicitly because of your association with the Christian faith or the Christian community. It cannot be you died, and even though the death was still a horrific event, you died as a result of a political issue that went after, for example, the Jews. And you happen to be a Jewish Christian, and you died as a persecution of the Jews. That's not being a martyr as defined in the Christian tradition, because you were not directly executed due to a hatred of Christianity or Christ or the faith, right? So that's another condition. And the last condition, the death must be voluntary. You are making a conscientious decision to give your life because of your connection to the faith, because you're being identified as a Christian. It has to be voluntary. If you are in hiding underground to preserve your life, faithful Christian, but you're underground and you're hiding, and they raid you, and you're trying to escape, and you die, classically defined, that's not a martyr. Because you weren't choosing to die, you just got caught. Right? There has to be some element, some opportunity to demonstrate you are voluntarily giving your life. So those are the three conditions of martyrdom, classically defined. I keep saying classically defined because now martyrdom is defined differently, okay? The characteristics during this period of a martyr. First of all, a martyr, or one who is, we'll say, accurately prepared for martyrdom, is one that realizes as a Christian, they have the expectation of this road to martyrdom. They're expecting the suffering and trials that occur on the way to martyrdom. And when they are selected for it, they actually are happy. They celebrate it. They celebrate it so much so, or I should say, they are in so much expectation that they desire martyrdom. They want to share in the same level of demonstration of the life of Christ as Christ himself, which of course gave his life. And when they are confronted with this road to martyrdom, they do not become mentally anguished, full of anxiety, or waywardness. They don't concentrate on the road that is leading them on to martyrdom, which is going to include trials and sufferings and so forth. That's not even what they think about. The entire time, what becomes even more of a reality to them is the reward for their faith up until martyrdom. It becomes more and more real as they go down this road to martyrdom. And lastly, through all of this, they have a calmness. So when we read through and look through these accounts today, I'm going to ask you, and these are not rhetorical questions, I'm looking for participation, or that's part of your grade, right? We're going to look for ways in which these individuals that we're going to be talking about demonstrated either fulfilling the conditions or demonstrating characteristics, okay? The first one I want you to pull out is Polycarp. Polycarp of Smyrna. The area of Smyrna would be modern day Izmir in Turkey. Polycarp became a bishop of Smyrna sometime during the 2nd century. Remember when I talked about the hierarchy of the church at that time? It's not like today. When you had a bishop of an overseer, he was over just that local Christian community. So Polycarp then would have been responsible for the spiritual oversight of Christians in Smyrna. The year that Polycarp was martyred was around 156 AD. So we're talking about right mid 2nd century. And he was 86 years old. Now, if you do the math, if he's 86 in 156 AD, that means that he was born about 4 decades after the time of Jesus. That also means that he was born at a time where the eyewitnesses of Jesus were still alive. Okay. So no doubt he came in contact with someone who was an eyewitness of Jesus. Tradition says that he was one of the disciples of St. John, the evangelist. We don't know that for sure or not, but that's what tradition says. That could mean he actually did know and meet St. John, the evangelist, or he could have been part of that, what's called the Johannine school that I talked to you about that developed the gospel. Okay. I want to direct you right in the beginning on page 57. Whomever is writing this account of Polycarp right away starts to set the stage and give you, I guess, I'll say the preview of what you're going to see in this account by giving us a demonstration of what a good martyr is and what a bad martyr is. If you look under that first subheading, good and bad examples of martyrdom, you have 2 martyrs that are listed there. Germanicus and Quintus. All right. Now, Germanicus, who was the good example of martyrdom, I'm gonna start reading the second sentence in the first paragraph. Speaking of Germanicus, it says, then he went on to confront the beasts in a noteworthy way. When the governor of the province tried to persuade him to recant, urging him to relent, because he was in the prime of his life, Germanicus instead grabbed the animals and forcibly drew them to himself. Drop down to the second to the last sentence. Seeing this, all the spectators were amazed at the bravery of the God-loving, God-fearing race of the Christians. They began to shout, get rid of the atheists, go find Polycarp. Germanicus here, when confronted and urged to recant, instead of recanting, according to this, he actually looked at the beast and just jumped right in. Right? He demonstrated, okay, let me ask. What condition did Germanicus meet for martyrdom? Which of the 3 conditions?
Must be voluntary.
It was voluntary. Because he was like, let's do this. All right, jumped right in. All right. Obviously, what other condition is there? I was gonna give it the answer, whether or not. What other condition is there? What? Well, death, obviously, right? But even the result of hatred, because what was the crowd's response when he showed the bravery? What does it say? Huh? What, Lucas? So there was a hatred, right? There was a hatred that was developed from his actions. Question: why do you think they would call him an atheist? Claire? Right. So remember, this is a society. This is important to take a note of. These are one of the main charges against Christians during this age of martyrdom, and what, quite frankly, allowed governors to sign their death warrants. The term atheist in the 21st century means that you do not believe, you do not subscribe to a belief in any divine being, which seems counterintuitive to call a Christian that, because quite frankly, that's the Christian shtick, right? But in antiquity, what an atheist was, by definition, was one who denied any of the pantheon of gods. You were an atheist. So if Christians only subscribe to the belief of one God, they would be charged as being atheists because they did not believe in the other gods. Okay, so that's important to keep in mind that was a major charge, and that's a different defining of atheism in the early church, or I should say in the second and third centuries. Now, before we get into the conditions and characteristics of martyrdom by Polycarp, I want you to notice how the arrest of Polycarp, remember, I can't stress this enough. Originally, someone would have heard the story of Polycarp orally. They would not have been reading it. Quite frankly, even after it was written, only certain people were literate, so they would be reading it to believers, and they would be hearing it. So they're hearing the story of Polycarp. I want you to recognize, we're going to look at the bottom of 57 and actually go into 59 through 59, looking at the arrest of Polycarp. You're going to see languages, particularly events, imagery, literary imagery, that moves the hearer in a particular way and to paint Polycarp in a particular light. And I want you to help me identify what these are. So let's go under the subheading, the arrest of Polycarp. And I'm going to go actually to the very bottom of the page, the beginning of the second paragraph where it says the authorities kept. It says the authorities kept pursuing Polycarp, so he moved to another farm. No sooner had he departed than the searchers arrived behind them. When they didn't find him, they seized 2 slave boys, and one of them confessed under torture. Really, it was quite impossible for Polycarp to avoid capture, since the ones who betrayed him were members of his own household. Now, the police chief, who was predestined to have the name Herod, urgently wanted to bring him into the stadium. All this happened so Polycarp would fulfill his destiny of becoming a partaker with Christ, while the betrayers eventually received the punishment of Judas himself. In that paragraph, what phrases, words would you think would jump out to a Christian in the beginning narrative of Polycarp's arrest? What would jump out if they were hearing this? What type of things? He was betrayed, right? So you have this word of betrayal. As soon as you hear about betrayal, they're immediately going to think about Jesus. What else is there? Torture, right? So you're going to think about the flogging of Jesus, his walk with the cross, right? All the torture. What else is there? Claire? Herod. I mean, you can't really get more direct mirror of Jesus's experience than to have the very person responsible, the police chief, his name is Herod. Okay? Herod, for those who may not know, Herod's name is mentioned twice during the life of Jesus. Herod, I'll call him Herod Sr., tried to arrange for Jesus' death when he was a toddler. And then his son, whose name also was Herod, all right, was there and part of the passion of Jesus. right, sending him to Rome. Right? There's something else that's there that's significant. Did anyone catch it? Lucas? It came, so the betrayer came out of his own household. Okay? So it was someone very close to him that betrayed him. All of this is going to create to the hearer this connection between Polycarp, which remember is representing the life of a martyr. Right? So there's going to be then this expectation of parallels between the martyr's life and the life of Jesus. There's even more in the second paragraph. It says, so then, taking the slave boy along, the mounted police officers set out on a Friday about supper time, armed with all their usual weaponry, as if they were pursuing a robber. Late that evening, they closed in on him, found him reclining in a little bedroom upstairs. Even then, he still had a chance to escape somewhere else, but he decided against it, saying God's will be done. When he heard the police arrive, he went downstairs and talked with them. The officers noticed his advanced age and quiet dignity, and was astonished at all the eagerness to arrest such a respectable gentleman. Right away, Polycarp ordered food and drink, set before the officers as much as they wanted. Then he asked them to grant 1 hour for him to pray undisturbed. When they said yes, he stood and prayed, but he was so full of God's grace that he couldn't be silent for 2 straight hours. All who heard him were amazed, and many regretted having to pursue such a godly old man. Same question as I asked before. What events that take place here mirror what you may have heard, and certainly what they would have heard about the life, the passion, specifically that passion period of Jesus? They all ate, right? So there was a meal prepared. He prayed, and notice how he said he prayed. He stood and prayed. Okay, there's many times, especially at the first Eucharist, where it talks about that Jesus stood and he prayed. All right, so that's a good one. What other ones are there that you see? That is
It says God's will be done.
God's will be done. That is a direct, it's cited. It's a direct quote of the same thing Jesus said just prior to his arrest. There's something else that's very, very obvious. I'm surprised no one's mentioned it. It took place on a Friday. Okay, so the arrest took place on a Friday. We've heard Good Friday, right? So again, we're seeing this language that is mirroring Jesus. There's something else I wanted to point out, and that is when he was praying at the very end, it says that all who heard him were amazed. There's a passage of scripture in the book of Mark, in the Gospel of Mark, where it says, after the disciples had already been following Jesus around, he had already done some miracles, he had already done some preaching. When he said, I am on my way to Jerusalem, it says that when they heard him speak, they were amazed. Okay, so you're just hearing this language that is saturated with this imagery of Jesus. So again, the martyr's life should be a parallel to Jesus. We'll do one more. Actually, we'll do one more, but I'm going to read both of the paragraphs together. These next couple paragraphs. This is at last when he finished his prayer, after remembering everyone he had ever met, whether great or small, famous or obscure, as well as a whole worldwide Catholic Church, it was time to depart. The officer set him on a donkey and led him into the city. Now it was high Sabbath day. The police chief, Herod, came out to meet him along with his father, Leketus. After transferring Polycarp to their carriage, they sat down beside him and tried to persuade him, saying, "What's the matter? What harm is there in saying Caesar is Lord, as you make a little sacrifice and do what's required?" It's the only way to save your life. At first, Polycarp gave no reply to them. But when they persisted, he finally said, I have no intention of doing what you're advising. Once they realized they had failed to persuade him, they began to hurl curses at him, tossing him from the carriage with such haste that he ripped open his shin as he was getting out. Without turning around, as if he hadn't even suffered an injury, he marched briskly away, eager to reach his destination. I asked you the same question, and I promise this last time I'm gonna ask you for this one. But in these two paragraphs, what are some of the things that would remind you of stories that you heard regarding Jesus?
Palm Sunday,
He's
he's riding on donkey.
riding on a donkey. Again, you cannot get any more direct in its association with Jesus. He rode into where he was going to be executed, just like Jesus, on the donkey. That's one. I'm sorry, go ahead. Yep. So what we're crossing over into and what you're going to get into is we're starting to see characteristics of a martyr. He read it. He got pulled out. They threw him to the ground. He was like, oh, you just helped me. And just got up and kept going. Walk briskly. I'm ready. All right. I'm going to read you guys because these are hidden, but I want you to realize how deep the connection to Jesus is in this text that doesn't jump out right away. So I'm going to read you first an account from the Gospel of Matthew. And this is Jesus during his arrest when he was brought before Pontius Pilate. Same instance such as here when he is brought before the police chief. It says, this is Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew. When it was morning, all the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. They bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate, the governor. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and Pilate questioned him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus says, I call this a boss moment. Jesus says, "You say so." And when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he made no answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not fear how many things they are testifying against you?" But he did not answer him one word. So the governor was greatly amazed. You have Polycarp being questioned, and Polycarp gives them no reply. People who are familiar with the story of Jesus, they're going to say, whoa, that is just like what Jesus did. Okay? I'm gonna read you one more. This is from the Gospel of John. Same account, but at this point, you know, each account is going to give us a little bit more detail, depending on the gospel writer. So this is the same account, but this is from the Gospel of John. This is when his accusers were before Pilate. So this is the accusers of Jesus before Pilate. Jesus is not there. They say to Pilate, "We have a law, and according to that law, he ought to die," speaking of Jesus, "because he made himself the Son of God." Now, when Pilate heard this statement, he became even more afraid and went back to the praetorium and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" Jesus did not answer. So Pilate said to him, "Do you not speak to me? Do you not know that I have the power to release you and I have the power to crucify you?" Another boss moment by Jesus. Jesus answered him, "You would have no power over me if it had not been given to you from above." In this account, Polycarp's account, he is given the opportunity to recant. He is told it's the only way to save your life. What did he say? "I have no intention of doing what you're asking me to do." So again, interweaving into this account, anyone who had heard the stories of Jesus it would have been very, very clear that the martyr's life is a mirror and parallel of Jesus. That's important so that you know what Christians, what they were striving to live for. It's not just, I want to be a good person like Jesus. It's literally, the goal is to be in so much union with Jesus that the very accounts, the very things that happened to Jesus are going to happen to me. That is what the theology of martyrdom, and that's the age that the church is in at this time. So now, let's look more now at the characteristics, specifically, and conditions of martyrdom that Polycarp fulfills. If you look under the subheading Polycarp in the Stadium, I want to point out right there in the beginning, the first paragraph, it says, as he was led into the stadium, such a huge uproar raging inside that no one could be heard at all. Yet when Polycarp entered, a voice rang out from heaven, "Be strong and courageous, Polycarp." I'm going to read to you another passage, but this is from the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures. It is a passage from the book of Joshua. It reads, after Moses, the servant of the Lord, had died, the Lord said to Moses' aide Joshua, "Be strong and courageous, so that you may give this people possession of the land I swore to their ancestors that I would give to them. Only be strong and courageous, being careful to observe the entire law which Moses, my servant, enjoined on you. Do not swerve from it to the right or to the left, that you may succeed wherever you go. I command you, be strong and courageous." So again, Polycarp is walking in. According to his account, a voice comes from heaven telling him the exact same words that the God of the Jews, the God of the Old Testament, said to Joshua, who was a successor of Moses. So it's making a connection, not only, right, to the life of Jesus, but the life of a martyr is a witness to the entire relationship of God with his people. Okay? Again, this is something that is intentionally being woven into the story. Now, so let's move on. I want to take you to go to page 60. The second paragraph where it says the governor kept pressing. This is the governor kept pressing, "Just swear the oath and I'll let you go. Curse the name of Jesus." Polycarp answered, "For 86 years I have been his servant and he has done me no wrong. How could I now blaspheme my king who saved me?" "Swear by the divine spirit of Caesar," the governor continued to urge. "If you think I'm going to do what you're asking and swear to Caesar's demon, you're mistaken. But since you keep pretending not to know who I am, hear me declare boldly, I am a Christian. Now, if you want to learn the doctrine of Christianity, name the day and give me a hearing." That's another false one. But what characteristic is Polycarp displaying? Which of these four characteristics did I just demonstrate? You know what? I forgot a characteristic. You're correct, but I forgot a characteristic. The most important one. Verbal confession. No wonder you guys are like, I don't see what you're talking about. Okay. So there's a characteristic. There has to be a verbal confession of the faith. He openly says, let me make it very clear to you, I am a Christian. All right. And then he makes a joke. If you want to learn about it, you can set me up a time. We can talk about it. But at the end of the day, I'm a Christian. All right. So you have verbal confession and calmness. Now, I don't want you to think he's sitting there saying, I'm a Christian. There's exclamation points, there's italics. He's screaming it, but there's still a calmness in the sense of he's being very courageous when the beast, which I didn't get to, the beasts are right in front of him. All right, and they're threatening him. We got beasts. Okay, it doesn't matter if I'm Christian. And you can tell from his excitement, he's showing that desire. All right. Matter of fact, I'll mention if you drop down a little bit, the governor says, I have wild beasts, and I'm going to throw you to them unless you change your mind. And Polycarp says, bring them on. We Christians can't change from something better to something worse. But what is truly beautiful is to turn oneself from wickedness to righteousness. Another characteristic I want to point out. If you drop 3 small paragraphs where he talks about the fire. When the governor realizes, okay, you're not scared of wild animals, then I'll burn you alive. Polycarp says the fire you're talking about burns for a very short time and then is quickly put out. Clearly, you're unaware of the fire of imminent judgment and eternal punishment that awaits the ungodly. So what are you waiting for? Come on, do whatever you wish. Obviously, again, he's still showing the calmness, but the expectation or the characteristic I want to point out, the more the governor is threatening him, his response and his orientation is more towards the blessings that he's going to receive. Whatever you're saying, it's not scary. He keeps doing that Dwayne Johnson thing. Bring it, right? Just come on, quit talking about it. Be about what you're saying. That's what Polycarp keeps saying. Just do it. All right. Another thing. So first of all, any questions on these characteristics of that Polycarp is showing of martyrdom? One thing that is associated with martyrdom very early, that is still a part of the Roman Catholic tradition and the Orthodox Catholic tradition, I think. Yeah, the Orthodox Catholic tradition has to do with what's called relics. You see evidence of this, and I want to point this out to you. This becomes a thing during the age of martyrdom. If you go on page 61, the beginning of the paragraph that says, so then, when they are preparing the pyre upon which Polycarp will be burned, if you look at the middle of that paragraph, Polycarp, trying to get ready for his death, says he even tried to unlace his own sandals, which he normally didn't have to do, because all the believers were always eager to be the first to have some sort of physical contact with him. This is an early account of the idea that Christian believers in the very early part of the church, we're talking about the 2nd century, were eager to have just some physical contact with one who was identified as being holy. The idea was just by being in their company, just by having physical contact with them, that in some way, that holiness would like rub off on them. Eventually, this gives way to the idea of anything that they owned, anything that they wore would also and could also transfer somehow that holiness. which moves into eventually the veneration of relics. The early Christians, particularly during the martyrdom period, were drawn to people of great spiritual devotion because they believed that these individuals, like Polycarp, would kind of leave, I call it, holy residue on the things that they wore, places that they occupied. And so what happens is you start having these pilgrimages to these places. It even went so far, if you look at what happens after the death of Polycarp. Page 63, that bottom paragraph. It says, therefore, when the centurion saw all the fuss aroused by the Jews, he set the corpse out in front of everyone. This is Polycarp's corpse, and cremated it according to pagan custom. And so at last we collected up Polycarp's bones, which were dearer to us than jewels and more esteemed than gold, and buried them in a respectable place. There, as often as possible, the Lord would allow us to assemble with great joy and delight to celebrate the birthday of Polycarp's martyrdom. Our observance will not only commemorate those who have already fought the fight as martyrs, but also train and prepare those who may find themselves facing such a call. We see here that the faithful, after Polycarp's death, they literally collect his bones. They bury them in a special place. And they begin to practice this gathering together in this place to celebrate his martyrdom. And no doubt, when they get together in these places, guess what they're doing? They're telling the story of Polycarp and preparing themselves for that call. Okay? This is what's happening during the age of martyrdom. This is the theology of martyrdom that develops, that becomes associated with Christianity. I want to say a few things about relics. What starts here with Polycarp, as I mentioned, is still a practice that is observed by many within the Roman Catholic and Orthodox Catholic tradition. The word relic, right, it comes from a Latin term which literally means I leave or I abandon. As time went on, along with the, as I mentioned, along with the remains of certain saints, their clothing and their personal effects also get enshrined. Right? These are things that are left behind. That's what they call a relic. They're left behind, they're abandoned. Next week, when we get into the imperial age, after the death of Constantine the Great, you begin to see an increase, and I don't have another term to use, in the trafficking of relics. There's a huge search for relics from those who were martyred during the age of martyrdom. Everybody talked about we're going to switch to a different age. Well, then there's this look back at those who had died, and there's this search for relics. These relics become encased in things like wood and ivory. They're buried in certain places. Pilgrimages are began. And early on, these were even worn around the neck. During the time of Constantine, again, we'll get into this next week, when you start seeing a large increase in the number of churches being built, Constantine began the practice, or at least the successors, began the practice of depositing in each church altar a relic. And at the time of the dedication of the church, that relic was placed in the altar. And then, and it's still practiced today, at the procession. Okay, those who have attended a Catholic Mass, when the priest and or deacon, whoever the cleric is, processes to the altar, after they bow to the altar, what do they do before they take their seat? They kiss the altar. They're kissing the altar. This is part of the tradition of the relic being placed in the altar, right? And this began back in the 4th century. There are 3 classes of relics. Three classes of relics. We'll say 3 classes, or we can say 3 degrees. A 1st degree relic. A 1st degree relic is a relic that is an actual part or remains of a saint. So the actual remains of a saint is a 1st degree relic. It could be a bone, hair, there's organs, limbs, things of that nature. Those are 1st degree relics. Second degree. A 2nd degree relic is any item that the saint wore, or something that touched the saint directly. So it could be like, let's say, for example, it could be St. Francis of Assisi. It could be a part of his robe. That would be a 2nd degree relic. And then you have a 3rd degree. A 3rd degree relic is something that touched the 1st degree relic, or if there is no 1st degree relic known, it touched the tomb of the saint. That's a 3rd degree relic. It is prohibited by the Catholic Church to sell 1st degree or 2nd degree relics. That prohibition is not against 3rd degree relics. Now, notice what I said. You cannot sell 1st degree or 2nd degree relics. But whatever they're encased in, you can sell that. Does that make sense? So if you see a 1st degree relic with a price tag, or a second degree relic with a price tag, it's not the relic that's being sold, it's what it's encased in being sold. I say that tongue in cheek because it's some very expensive plastic out there that's holding the first degree relic. Okay. So again, this is just there is a prohibition of selling first degree relics, first and second degree relics. All right. The last thing I want to say about Polycarp before we move on to Perpetua and Felicity. If you look in the conclusion, there's a sentence, 3 sentences in, speaking about Polycarp. It says that he was not only a distinguished teacher, but an outstanding martyr whose death everyone wants to imitate because it glorified to the gospel of Christ. That is the fundamental, I'll say, addition to the identity of Christianity that takes place in the age of martyrdom. And that is to be an outstanding Christian, to be able to live your life or fulfill exemplifying the gospel in your life is the road to martyrdom, like Polycarp. Okay. Any questions on Polycarp? All right. We're going to transition and shift gears and talk about the other martyr account. And this is called the story of Perpetua and Felicity. Even though the account is often referred to as the martyrdom of Perpetua and Felicity, you actually have 5 individuals in this account who are martyred, a group of Christians. The heroine of the story, Perpetua, was a noble aristocrat in Carthage. By all evidence, or by all record, she was educated, she was young, she was married. In the story, she had just given birth to a son. All of this when her martyrdom took place. What is interesting, just as a side note, she was married, but her husband is never mentioned in this account, which would be odd. Her father is mentioned, but her husband is not, which leads some scholars to speculate either her husband was a Christian as well and was present, but wasn't mentioned in the story, or her husband had passed away prior to this. For her husband not to be mentioned at all is odd, which speaks to the uniqueness of the story, that it revolves around Perpetua, or at least the main heroine in this account is Perpetua, which is unique for that period. Perpetua is the only aristocrat or noble person in this group. If you remember Tuesday, I talked about one of the emperors whose name was Servius Septimius, or was the other way around, Septimius Servius. The point is, there was an emperor, all right, who gave the edict that no new conversions could take place. Okay, this is the time of Perpetua. In this particular province where Perpetua was, the leader of the province, the whole reason why these arrests were taking place is he was preparing for Caesar's, baby Caesar, right, Servius's son's birthday. And Servius' son, who was 14 years old, was coming to the Providence and he wanted to have a birthday celebration. And part of the birthday celebration was gladiator fights, right? Including, we need to round up some Christians and execute them in the gladiator ring. Again, there's evidence that he did not expect a noble woman to be part of that group, which is the reason why throughout the story, her father keeps coming in and like, can't you just shake this whole thing off? Because you ain't supposed to be in this group with everybody else. If you notice, no one else is getting anybody coming in, begging them to come out. It's just the father, because she wasn't supposed to be wrapped up in this group. Others that are there, it's Felicity, who's also a young lady. At the time of her arrest, she was 8 months pregnant. We'll talk about that a little bit, how that worked out in the story. And then you have, it appears, three gentlemen, Saturnius and Rovactus. Not a lot are mentioned about those two, but there were two gentlemen that were there. And then you have Satyrus. The story, or at least the diary portions, are written by Perpetua and Satyrus. Satyrus was obviously looked at among the Christian community as a leader. He was an educated man, and again, we'll talk about this a little bit in the visions. In the visions that Perpetua has, he always precedes her in the martyrdom and is inviting her to join him. So again, that scholars say that the notes that Perpetua saw him as a leader, one leading the way in the community, Christian community. So let me point out a few things that we can get from this story of Perpetua. First, let's go to page 94. 94, 95, under Perpetua under house arrest. I'm going to read excerpts from just these two paragraphs. I want to see if you can deduce what caused Perpetua's arrest. Or jailing, I should say. So under there, it says, while we were still under house arrest, my father earnestly tried to dissuade me with words and keep seeking to break my resolution out of his great love for me. Father, I said, let me give you an example. Do you see this vessel laying here? This little pitcher or whatever? Yes, I see it. Could you call it by another name than what it really is? No, it's the same with me. I can't be called anything other than what I am, a Christian. You go to the last paragraph of that section. Over the next few days, my father was gone, and I thank the Lord for that. I was actually comforted by his absence. During that time, I was baptized. The Holy Spirit spoke to me and emphasized that I should not desire anything after this water except the endurance of my flesh. I'm going to read the next sentence of the next section. It was only a short time later that we were thrown into the dungeon. What do you think? So at the beginning of this, Perpetua was in house arrest. What event took place between that and her being jailed and thrown in the dungeon? What happened? Let's do Maddie. She was baptized. That tells us something about the significance of water baptism in the early church. She was under house arrest. Now, when we think house arrest, now, unless somebody here is independently wealthy, and bless you if you are. When we think house arrest, we think our house. Like, if you're under house arrest, you cannot leave the edifice that is your home. For Perpetua, when it's house arrest, it means that she's an aristocrat. She's a noble lady. That means she can't leave her lands, right? But that's house arrest. She went from house arrest, which is obviously because she's associated with the Christian community. That's why our father's like, would you leave this stuff alone? Okay. But once she is baptized, she is no longer just associated with the Christian community. Now she is Christian. And that is identified not just by the Christian community, but also by the local government. Because now, no, you're not house arrest. Now we have to jail you. All right. So this just emphasizes the importance, the significance of water baptism. Okay. So in other words, since its early existence, water baptism has been a public identity marker for joining the Christian community. When she is put into jail, one of the characteristics I've talked about is desiring calmness, expecting it, celebrating it. If we're talking about Perpetua, we're talking about someone who's a good martyr, it may seem, if you look in the second paragraph, under Perpetua is jailed, it may seem that I'm contradicting myself because it says there that she was very anxious when she was in the jail. But the reason why she was anxious, if you look in the middle of the paragraph, it says, I nursed my baby who was weak with hunger. Since I was so anxious about him, I spoke to my mother and strengthened my brother, and I committed my son into their care. But then I started to waste away because I could see they were consumed with worry for him. Oppressive fears like these tortured me for many days. At last, I arranged for my baby to stay with me in the jail. Once my distress and concern for my child had eased up, I recovered my health right away. All of a sudden, the prison seemed like a palace to me. I wanted to be there more than anywhere else. So her anxiousness had nothing to do with the jail. It's because, like any mother, she was concerned about her child's welfare, not her own. All right, so she's still showing these characteristics of a martyr. The jail is fine. Matter of fact, once her baby was taken care of, and she realized, okay, he's getting what he needs, this dungeon has just turned into a palace. And I'd rather be nowhere else than where I am right now. All right. To emphasize the desire of Christians, or at least the perception of martyrdom to Christians, if you look, we're not going to go through the vision, but in the vision that she has to the ladder of heaven, just before she has that vision, her brother, who's not arrested, but obviously he must be associated with Christians as well, because he says to her, if you look, honorable sister, you are now greatly privileged. You can ask for a vision to show you whether there is to be a martyrdom or a release. The fact that she's arrested and she has been the recipient of direct persecution for being Christian, her brother sees this, you're in a privileged position. You actually have now, not because you've gone through this, you can ask God to let you know what's going to happen. Again, it lets us know that early on in the Christian community, there's this association with torture, with persecution, with suffering that puts you in a privileged position. All right? This is all a result of this theology of martyrdom. All right, moving on. If you go to page 97, there's two things I want to bring out. First, again, so by the way, I went over very quickly, but you have a verbal confession of faith between Perpetua and her father, right off the bat. And now in the dungeon, actually, this is when she's brought before the governor, on page 97 towards the bottom. You see these appeals. You saw the same thing in Polycarp. The governor is saying, look, if you just recant your statement, if you just simply curse the name of Christ, if you just simply give up this Christian thing, we will spare you. Right? Again, I want to point out, they're not giving this opportunity to anybody else, but they're giving it to Perpetua because she's a noble one. Right? He's saying, think about your father. Right? Think about your brother. Think about your family. Think about your son. And what is the response? He asks her flat out, are you a Christian? I am a Christian. So, again, you're seeing this consistent verbal confession of the faith despite all kinds of opportunities to escape. All right? Which also tells us, and again, this is going to come up in the imperial age, there was, and I mentioned this briefly, when Christians under threat of persecution and death, when they did recant, they were given a certificate, right? Because once your name is out there, you're associated with Christians, somebody may come up and say, hey, you're a Christian, it's time to arrest you again. No. I got this certificate. I'm good. I did my pagan observance, all right? This is going to come up later. But a martyr would reject that and give a verbal confession. Good mother, good Christian. Again, I want to point out, at this point, because of her verbal confession, the governor sentences Perpetua to die at the gladiator games by being executed by the wild animals or the wild beasts. It mentions that she rejoiced as she was at her sentence, right? She happy. All right, let's do this. But she brings up again, and this is just unique. I can't stress how unique this is for this time period. She brings up again that the concern about her son, right? So her first thought is, okay, I need to nurse my son. Again, demonstrating the privilege that someone has on this road to martyrdom. If you look at the bottom paragraph, the third sentence in, then because my son had gotten used to staying with me in the prison and being nursed, I immediately sent Pomponius, the deacon, to ask my father for the baby, but my father refused to hand him over. However, God made sure the baby no longer desired to nurse, and I didn't suffer any inflammation, so I wouldn't be burdened by anxiety for my son and pain in my breast. God intervened, apparently weaned the baby from nursing. Not only weaned the baby from nursing, but as if you don't know, there is a biological thing with women who are nursing, that if you don't nurse, there could be some discomfort, which for Perpetua would bring up the anxiety dealing with her child. Well, guess what? That went away too. So the point is, it's very intentionally bringing out the uniquely feminine perspective of enduring martyrdom, which was significant at that time, for the story to be so important that even today, 1,800 years later, she's counted among the litany of saints. Okay. I want to switch gears. Let's talk about some of the others who are there, specifically Felicity. If you look at page 102 to 103, it introduces Felicity. As I mentioned, Felicity was also a young lady who was arrested along with the others. But she was arrested and she was pregnant. She was 8 months pregnant. Now, what is unique about Felicity and her pregnancy is that there was a law that you could not execute a pregnant woman. However, instead of using that, like, okay, I can stave this off, Felicity actually was in anxiety because she was like, damn it, I'm not going to be able to be martyred with my fellow Christians because I'm pregnant. Right? So she actually prayed and desired, can I have this baby so I am with those who are martyred? Again, I want to emphasize the strong desire to fulfill the call to martyrdom. So much so that she's like, come on, let's get this thing done and over. All right. It even mentions, okay, first of all, it's a blessing. She has the baby. And in the thrones of having a baby. Now, I have 6 children. I've witnessed all my children, boom. And my wife went 100% natural with all 6 of them. Not a drug at all, not just a little bit of oxygen. And let me tell you something. That's all I'm gonna say, because all 6 times I was like, ooh, Lord, if it was me, I'd be like, shoot me up, dead me something, do something. Okay, this is because it was I mean, talk about the pain. Ooh, Lord, I got a mark on my hand, on my arm. I always tell this story. I don't know, it's this one. It's a bite mark that never healed because I'm standing next to my wife. This is a squirrel moment, I'm gonna tell y'all this. I'm standing next to my wife. She's on this side. I'm trying to do the husband thing, the whole, thing, which she telling me, shut up, you ain't helping at all, right? But I'm trying to do the husband thing. I grabbed her hand, this hand over here, I grabbed it with this hand. At the time, she was leaning over to this side, if you can picture. I was in the military at the time. This was my firstborn son, Navy hospital. The Navy corpsman said to me, sir, you might want, he was trying to get me to grab the other hand. He didn't say it fast enough. That the one contraction hit, she pulled my arm all the way across her body and bit down on my arm. I was beat, get it off. I was trying, I'm hitting my wife, they trying to catch it. It was a hot mess. But the point I'm trying to make is this. In the dungeon, 3rd century, Felicity is having a child. In those pains, and you know what she says? Look in the middle of 103. Felicity answered, right now I must endure what I'm suffering, but on that day, speaking about the day that you'll be thrown to the beast, there will be someone inside me to bear the pain on my behalf, since I'll be suffering for him. So she's joyously going through this pain with the full expectation that this is the worst it's going to get, because the next time when I'm suffering, Jesus is going to be right there with me, suffering with me. Again, I'm emphasizing the characteristics that you're seeing from the martyrs. If you go over to page 104, this is where verbal confessions play a role. It was customary before the gladiator games that they had something that was called a banquet, a free banquet. And in the free banquet, it was a meal that was given to the gladiators, as well as a final meal to those who were going to be executed. And the people who were going to be attending the games would come to the banquet and kind of real creepily look through the pens that had those who were going to die and watch them eat their final meal. Like some weird voyeuristic stuff. All right. Yes.
They do it.
Right, they bet on the
At, like at the base that they would place their flag.
Absolutely.
Saying
who would die first.
which flag.
Anybody seen the Squid Game thing? The Squid Game? Come on, y'all know y'all seen it. Y'all might not want to say y'all saw the Squid Game, but some of y'all I know saw the Squid Game. I watched it, I'm not gonna lie. And at the end of the Squid Game, you had these bets, right, of who was gonna die first. It's the same type of thing that was happening here. So they bet on who's gonna die first, and they also bet on the gladiators, who they thought was gonna win between the gladiators. All right? In this free banquet, as they were being looked at, notice what Satyrus says to those who are peering at them as they're watching their meal. Page 104, the second full paragraph. Looking at those who are looking at them, Satyrus says, will tomorrow not be enough for you? Why are you so eager to gawk at those you hate? Today you're friendly. Tomorrow you'll be our deadly enemies. Just make sure you pay close attention to our faces so you can recognize us when the time comes. The point I'm making is Satyrus is still talking very bold. You want to look at it, go and look now. But don't be turning your eyes when we're getting massacred. Make sure you're looking into it. All right? He wants them to understand we're going fully voluntary. We're going courageously and we're going bravely. We're not going, crying, asking for mercy. One other thing I want to bring out in 105, well, first of all, 104, as they're finally being marched into the arena. If you look right at the beginning of that paragraph under the subheading, the martyrs in the amphitheater at Carthage, it says, at last their victory dawned. The martyrs proceeded cheerfully from the prison to the amphitheater. It talks about Perpetua having this radiant countenance, right? They're ready. They're celebrating it. They're desiring it. They're looking for it as a day of victory. Why? Because they're looking forward to be able to fully exemplify the life of Jesus. So much so that if you look at 105, the second paragraph towards the end, the people who are watching them, no doubt being agitated by their cheerfulness and confidence, it says that as they're walking through the crowds, if you can picture them walking kind of through the entrance into the stadium, as they're walking by, people are whipping them as they're walking by. And they say there that they're giving thanks that they're able to receive the same punishment and torture that their Lord suffered. Because Jesus, of course, was flogged before he was crucified. Again, they're looking forward to this martyrdom. And since I have to end the story, we've done this built up to their martyrdom, we have to talk about how they actually died. If you look at 106 through 108, I'm not going to read it, obviously, but I'm going to go through how each of those martyrs died. First, the two martyrs that were not spoken of very much, they're mentioned here, Saturnius and Revocatus. Actually, so they took the three men. So you have Satyrus, Saturnius, and Revocatus were all put together, and they were all assigned an animal that they would have to confront. It's interesting that Satyrus actually was hoping that he would get one animal and didn't get another. The point is, they're so confident and desiring this so much. Now, I don't know about you. If I knew I was about to go into an arena and have to face a bear, a wild boar, and or a leopard, I'm not gonna lie. I'm gonna be crying like a baby. I'm gonna be like, this is not. They're gonna have to drag me out there. I'm just gonna be real. They're gonna have to drag me out there. These guys are in the court talking about who you think you got. They doing like rock, paper, scissors about what animal that they hope they get. That's how confident they are. It says the satirist was upset that he didn't get the animal that he wanted. He was offended because he got attached and matched with a boar. He's like, oh, I get a boar. I don't get any of the cool ones. I don't get the leopard. I don't get the bear. I get a pig. Really? I get a pig. But this boar, he says, just dragged him around a little bit. It killed the handler, but then just dragged him around a little bit. And then when he finally got put on the platform to wait for the bear apparently had already had his full with the other two and didn't come out. He was like, damn. All right, so satirist had to go back in. He made it through the first wave. Perpetua and Felicity are brought out. It is significant that the animal that they had to face apparently was a very mad cow. All right, not a bull. This is a cow, specifically a cow. No doubt. This is because both of them had just given birth to children. All right, so this is a almost like a mock to the face. They get thrown in with a cow. I do want to point out some specifics on both Perpetua and Felicity on how they reacted when they were attacked. If you look at 107, the second paragraph, it says, the cow tossed Perpetua first, and she landed on her hip. Sitting up, she immediately straightened her tunic where it was ripped along the side to cover her thighs. For Perpetua cared more about modesty than pain. Then she sought a hairpin and straightened her disheveled hair. She believed it was improper for a martyr to die with her hair unbound, which would make it look like she was mourning in her moment of triumph. She was so concerned about how her martyrdom would be represented that she made sure, even after being hit by a cow, I'll be right now, I get hit by a cow, game over. Okay, she got up immediately, straightened her clothes, and fixed her hair. Because I'm not about to go out looking like I'm begging for my life. I'm about to go out looking good. All right? And I mean good, looking strong. Okay, looking modest and looking strong. And what a Felicity. Seeing Felicity's crumbled form lying on the ground, Perpetua went over and offered her a hand, helping Felicity to stand. The two of them stood there side by side. With the brutality of the crowd satisfied, the two martyrs were brought back into the gate of life. So in other words, they survived. Just like satirists, they survived the attack by the animal, so then they get put back in the gate of life for the next round. The women were separated from satirists. Satyrus is sent out again. This time he is sent out to the leopard. He is, I don't know how he survived this, but he is bitten by the leopard, mauled by the leopard, and completely covered in his own blood. Yet he still survived. That round. Eventually, and again, they were so, I think this is what the story is trying to assert, is that their strength, their resolve was so strong that the wild beasts could not kill them. Eventually, they had to be pierced with a sword. It says the martyrs, but this is under the martyrs give their lives for Christ. On 108, the second paragraph, the martyrs willingly stood up, went over to the place the people wanted. But first they kissed one another, and in doing so, they consummated their martyrdom with the kiss of peace. Each of them remained completely still and took the sword silently. especially Satyrus. Just as he was the first to ascend the ladder in the dream, that's the vision I told you about, he was also the first to be martyred, to give up his spirit. So in like the vision that we didn't talk about, but it's a ladder that ascended to heaven through their death, he was awaiting Perpetua. In the vision, he tells Perpetua, be careful where you step, but come on. Right? So he's awaiting Perpetua. And then this follows by Perpetua and Felicity dying. These characteristics of desiring it, they were calm, consistent verbal confessions. And if you notice, as they move, so from the time of their arrest, as they progress further and further to that fateful date of martyrdom, especially Perpetua, she had a couple visions, right? And these visions kept affirming the blessings that are going to occur after her martyrdom. These stories, these two that we've covered and others like them, become very significant as stories of encouragement, stories of hope during this age of martyrdom. Okay. During this period of 100, 150 years, the Christianity always had this constant threat of persecution and trial. Now, again, I do not want you to believe that the majority of Christians were martyred. It actually was a very small number of Christians that were actually, relatively speaking, okay, small number of Christians that were martyred because of their faith. However, the stories of these Christians is what kept Christianity, despite all the attempts of exterminating the movement, exterminating the tradition, kept it going. It's ironic that the theology continued to evolve to its time. And what you will see in the 4th century is a dramatic shift with Christianity from moving in this age of martyrdom where they're constantly underground. They're constantly having to be strategic in where they worship. They constantly have to keep the hope alive by telling these stories of the martyrs, to now all of a sudden no longer being hunted, no longer having to be underground, but in actuality, they are the very tool, the very instrument that the emperor uses to strengthen the empire. And they switch from being the hunted to actually being those who have significant influence and power in the empire. The question is, if you develop a theology where the ultimate expression of your faith in the gospel is martyrdom, what do you do when you're not being martyred? What happens? What now becomes the way to demonstrate your full allegiance to the gospel if we're not being martyred anymore? In fact, we're the ones in power. It's the first time Christianity, from the time of Jesus was, I've mentioned it, poor, ostracized, killed. He was never, the crowds were never, I hate to break it to you, the crowds were never cheering Jesus on, okay? Regardless of how dramatic the movies want to get, he was never the popular figure outside of his inner circle. Christianity was never the popular figure. Now they are. How does this affect Christianity? How does it affect the theology of Christianity? That's what we'll talk about next week. And as I promised, I'm getting you guys out early today. All right. Look for, again, the weekly assignment. I have no idea what it is because I already prepared it. I will have the ones that you've done. They will be graded today. So hopefully when you guys walk in Tuesday, everything will be up to date with grading. And like I said, the lectures will be there. Important topics for the past 2 weeks. All of that should be there. close of the day tomorrow, for sure. All right? All right, see you guys next week. Were your ears burning yesterday?
Oh, gosh. Were yours?
No. Why? Were you talking about them? I was talking about you.
Really?
Yeah, good things though.
Do you possibly have to talk to about me?
I know a lot of people.
Concerned. I'm scared.
No. Actually, you came up because oh, wait a minute. Oh, man, I don't know if it got recorded.
It said at the beginning that it was.
Okay.